Well, Halloween is coming, so we're going to try not to frighten you, okay? We're going to talk about human resources, but remain calm. We've got this covered. My guest is an expert in human resources with a particular emphasis on municipal government human resources. Lisa Bergerson, welcome to The Local Perspective.
Thank you. I am very blessed to be here.
Well, that remains to be seen, but we think we're going to have fun. Oh, I almost forgot. I'm Jerry Deshane. I'm the host of The Local Perspective, whapping away at my microphone there. The Local Perspective is a brief discussion of issues of interest to local governments all over the state. Today we are in Watertown. This is Watertown TV, a very nice place. We have a wonderful audience. They're giving us the wave back there. I really appreciate that. But I want to thank Karen Huesman and the team here at Watertown TV for setting this up. Before we get started, I also want to thank community media, our stations throughout the state that have been so good to us in distributing this program. So, Lisa, you are the founder and principal attorney of an organization called Engage HR Law.
Correct.
So, you were a municipal human resources director. So, how'd you end up where you are today? What's going on?
Well, the first half of my career, so for 19 years, I practiced employment law with a downtown firm in Milwaukee, and kids happened, and I was unable to juggle that career. So I stepped out of the working place for a while and raised my kids. Actually, by the time they got to school, I took up this position at City of Pewaukee, working part-time at that time, leading human resources. So and I've been there 11 years. About 2 years ago, I said to my administrator that I really was looking to get back into law. You know, before my career sunsetted, I wanted to be practicing law again. And so he and I put a transition plan in place. And my last day as an employee literally was just a few weeks ago. My successor's in place, and she's going to do really well. And I launched this practice primarily to help smaller employers, smaller municipalities.
So it's a law practice, but you really are going to hone in or zero in on HR, specifically government HR or all small employer HR?
Well, actually I'm doing a couple of things. With Engage HR Law, the practice is going to be focused primarily on smaller employers with a human resources consulting and employment law focus. And actually a big part of what I do with Engage HR Law is workplace investigations, because it's hard for in-house, attorneys to represent their own clients sometimes in those. So I'm filling a void there for independent, quality, impartial investigations. And then I'm also of counsel with Bulow Vetter, which is a 14-person employment law firm. And I'm there as a special counsel helping them as I can and helping them grow their practice.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the work you've been doing or just started doing with the League and with League Mutual Insurance. I saw you do a presentation at League Mutual Insurance's Spring Policy Holders Conference, and you've done webinars for us. And I don't know if folks, it's always dangerous to kind of hold up a magazine, but
I brought mine.
If people notice, we are now running a monthly column in the municipality magazine, written by you, Lisa. So tell me about that. Why are we doing all this?
Well, it started, as you pointed out, with, actually I reached out to Gail. That's how this started, because as my successor was becoming more and more trained at the city, I had more time available. So I reached out to Gail to do the webinar. That's really how this started. And I said I had talked to so many communities over my 11 years. People just knew of me, or they knew I had practiced law, they used to be clients, whatever the case may be. They contacted me with questions and concerns. And so when I saw Gail advertising the webinar, I'm like, oh, I would love to do that just to reach people and help them with their HR questions if they didn't have anywhere else to go.
Well, and it's funny because even before the show started, we were chatting with some of the Watertown folks about their work. And, you know, they had a question that frankly we hear all the time. How do we train these people who are now supervisors in what they need to know in human resources? How common do you find that question? How often do you hear that?
It happens a lot. I mean, even at the city, where we have a quote-unquote trained, city of Pewaukee, trained HR professional, I actually found different consultants, if you will, places that offered training for making that transition from rank and file to the world of the supervisor. Because, and in our case, where this happened quite often was in the union environment, in our fire department, for example. Someone might get promoted to lieutenant, get promoted to division chief, and now they're coming out of a unionized rank and file and now managing them. So we used a couple of different things. One, we would do in-house training for our supervisors in all the legal requirements. And then we sent them to, I can't think of what organization it is right now, but there was an organization that offered, maybe it was a prior seminars, offered that just what are the gut checks that somebody has to have? What are the qualities, the characteristics that they have to now make that leap and now supervise the people that you once were close to? And there's, you know, psychology around that. So I want to say it was like a prior or career track type program that we sent them to.
Okay. Well, let's shift and let's talk a little bit about that, about the nature of some of the traps and the mistakes, the danger zones, because you know, Watertown is actually not one of the largest communities in Wisconsin, but it would be considered a larger community.
Yeah, yeah.
A significant number of places in Wisconsin are population of 1,500 or less.
Yep.
The HR department is, oh yeah, today I'm the clerk. Nope, I'm the HR director. I'm this, I'm that.
Yeah.
And yet the law still applies, right?
Mostly.
So whether you're Watertown or Milwaukee or Osseo, what are some of the most common traps or mistakes that people make, you know, whether inadvertently or otherwise?
That's a big question. Ignorance of the law is the #1 mistake.
But
It's
that's
the
excusable, right?
#1
Ignorance is an excuse. I'm kidding.
Sadly, it isn't. And this is why I have a heart for what I'm doing right now. Because I had 19 years as an employment lawyer. I had 11 years as a human resources director. Okay? That's a combined pretty good resume there. I still, in my time there, found that there were little quirks and pieces of the law that I wasn't aware of. And so what makes me nervous about that is someone who doesn't even have that training, that baseline, you know, what can we do to help get them where they need to be?
Okay. So, and I made a joke about that. Obviously, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Human resource law is always evolving, very complicated.
Yeah.
So what's, you know, a municipal administrator to do? Where should she start on day one?
Boy, that's a day one. I'm not going to start with day one because I'm sure there's budget and finance and all. That's part of the problem, right? Is that there's so much else on the plate. But the people part has to be a priority in some extent. And that's because it is an area that's so fraught with danger. And I just want to bring this one issue up because the #1 area where I think we've seen issues after the league conference, for example, I had so many people come. After the webinar, I had so many people call, and wage and hour is a big issue. So, for example, there's the FLSA, the federal law, and then the state of Wisconsin has almost a mirror law, except in some very key areas. Travel time, for example, lunch breaks, for example, all these little ins and outs that people don't realize exist. So that's my very long way of saying that at some point, whoever is going to own HR in the organization has to take the time to become educated and trained in whatever format, whatever way their budget allows.
Is there an HR 101 book out there? Is there a single seminar? Where would they go? And I say part of this because I think the league itself is going to try to provide the answer with
Yes.
your expertise.
Yep.
Because that's why we're doing
Yep.
this program today. That's why we do this
Magazine.
monthly magazine.
Right.
But, you know, we talked about the new administrator. She's drinking through a fire hose. You're right. She will not have enough money. Understanding budget and
Yep.
levy spreadsheets, it's all nightmarish.
Yeah.
But is there a good kind of, at least get you started, place to turn to?
It's going to be kind of cobbled together, which
Okay.
is one of the reasons I think we're doing what we're doing, as you point out. Let me just say one thing about the magazine. What I've done in that magazine is taken so much of the flood of comments and calls and emails about this is what we're struggling with and tried to make those monthly columns hit those so that these are the struggles that many are dealing with, and we're trying to address those month by month. To answer your other question, though, take my magazine, the very first August edition, and if you go to the back of it, or the very end of it, I should say, there's resources there that I would strongly suggest, and that would be starting with a human resources certification program. That's going to be the deep dive into all things human resources, literally all things human resources. The Society of Human Resource Management, SHRM, has one for all stages. So if you're just starting out in human resources, they have one for that. If you're somewhere in between an expert and just starting, they have one for that, and they have the expert one as well. SHRM's an excellent resource for that. HRCI is another organization that offers it. I can't remember the other one called, the Public Employer International something, I can't think of it right now, but they offer a certification program. And then use your free resources, like ICMA offers. They have an amazing page, quite frankly, dedicated to human resources issues. For $200, you can join SHRM, and they have an amazing offering of resources. Where things get a little dicey is just what I talked about before, which is where Wisconsin law differs from these other organizations. Aren't going to deal with Wisconsin law, really. So that's where the cobbling comes in. You have to look at some other places for that. So for example, SHRM has local chapters throughout the state. I think there's a map that I provided in that article. The Wisconsin State SHRM Council puts on an awesome in October conference in the Dells. And they have over 50 programs from base level. When you're a speaker, though, you actually have to tell them, are you addressing basics, mid-level, or expertise? So going to those kinds of things, Bulow Vetter offers quarterly. They have seminars that they put on for free for anyone. You don't even have to be a client. Anybody can come to those. Law firms put out newsletters. Bulow Vetter has one, for example. So you have to just try and piece it all together, knowing that Wisconsin law can vary, and you have to look for some mechanisms there.
And you'll also be one of the deep dive speakers at our annual conference.
Yep.
How the deep dives for our audience, those are 2 or 3 hour extended sessions on a topic, and they happen on Wednesday morning. What are you planning there? Are you going to try to do the ABCs, or are you going to tell them what resources are out there? What's your intention?
Actually, I'm starting with the webinar and just modifying that according to the feedback that I've received.
Okay.
The webinar I had people calling and writing, and it's so clear to me that there's so many just basic level things that aren't being done, that I feel that just maybe tweaking that webinar around some of the things that have come up since then, since the article, for example, and modifying it. But my intent is to hit as many of those Wisconsin law issues as possible, because that seems to be, people understand ADA. They understand reasonable accommodation in a big picture sense. What they don't understand often is the nuances there in Wisconsin.
Can you get a little more specific about that? I mean, obviously, we don't want to talk about, you know, the city of Schwartz has this specific problem, but give us an example of a wage and hour issue or a travel time issue question that someone raised to you and it just set off all sorts of alarms in your mind.
Well, I'll go actually a step further than that because the city of Sheboygan lived it. 2 years ago, or actually longer than that, but 2 years ago a decision was issued and they lost on summary judgment a fairly significant wage and hour case that involved overtime, the calculation of overtime. Some of the nuances both under federal law and state law came into play there. The thing about the wage and hour litigation that makes it a great starting point and one that employers should start with is that it's seen a resurgence. And I think it's because employees are becoming more savvy about what their legal rights are. And wage and hour litigation, if you're doing payroll and you're doing payroll wrong relative to a whole host of employees, now it's a class action. That's what the city of Sheboygan case was. So it's very lucrative, potentially, very attractive to employment attorneys who represent employees. And so it's a very real consideration and concern.
And I'm just asking myself, if I'm the head of payroll in Sheboygan, how would I have known?
Precisely. And if there's one thing my mantra will be when I speak in October at your group, it is employers, just let me use this as an example. At the league conference, I had a woman come up to me and say, I've practiced payroll for 25 years in this organization. I didn't know an eighth of what you went over. That truly does break my heart because not only is the organization is being exposed to liability, but now employees aren't getting what they are legally entitled to either. So all the way around, training's a big issue.
Okay, great. Kind of catch our breath here because I promised that we would not frighten people, and I think we're heading the wrong direction. I'm Jerry Deshane. This is the Local Perspective. My guest is Lisa Bergerson, an attorney specializing in human resources and a new resource for municipalities throughout Wisconsin. You'll see Lisa's name every month in the municipality magazine. You'll also see webinars. You'll see a variety of products, I would hope, moving forward. I'm almost afraid to ask, what's new when it comes to human resources? What's on the horizon, new laws, new rules?
CBD is big.
Oh, yeah.
I've had so many questions about CBD, and we obviously don't have time to get into it. Just from a thumbnail perspective, CBD is legal in Wisconsin. Marijuana use is not. That may be coming, given the wave that we see. Just think to yourselves as employers, alcohol can impair somebody, and I have rights relative to use of alcohol by my employees. In a very big picture sense, it's the same thing with CBD. So we don't need to be overly concerned about that our rights will be any different if our employees are using CBD. What it does speak to is employers should be training their frontline managers on how to recognize impairment. The managers don't need to be worried about impairment, the cause of impairment, but they need to recognize when there is a potential impairment and they need to know how to handle it.
Will there need to be testing? Like there's drug testing, there's alcohol testing for certain occupations. Will we need that for CBD, or should the focus be on impairment? If that person appears to have either judgment or physical movement limitations.
Yes, absolutely. Whatever they're recognizing per their training, then they would follow that protocol. I don't know a lot about CBD per se. The State Bar just ran a really good article on it, and so I got out of that it is, at least at this point, lawful. And what I believe I read in that article is that it doesn't necessarily cause impairment at the levels that it's being sold is what I understood.
Okay.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and profess to be an expert on that, but I just want the message is that employers need to know that they have rights in this area, and that training is very important.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about employee recruiting. Right now, there is not a department out there, I think I can say with confidence, there's not a department in any city or village in Wisconsin that doesn't have its eye on something, some sort of employee need.
Yeah.
A shortage of police officer candidates, or this or that.
Yeah.
First of all, what are some recruiting techniques that work? And then second of all, what are some common mistakes that employers should watch out for?
I would say that the number one mistake is, and I understand the shortage, I lived that shortage, paid on-call firefighters, assessors, building inspectors, engineering technicians. I lived that, so I know. I will tell you that the number one mistake is to get a body in the vacant position, regardless of who that person is, as long as they have your license or your certification. Making the mistake of just putting a body in the chair is a really bad one.
Even in times of real?
Even in times of desperation. We had plenty of desperation, especially in our building inspection and our assessing departments. There's contractors out there that can bridge you until you get the person who should be in that position. But let me answer the first part of the question. There's long-term and short-term strategies. Long-term, organically speaking, professions have to go back to high school. They have to go back to college. If you look at some of these professions I just talked about, they're not being populated. You know, these high school kids, these college kids, they don't look at these as professions. I will talk to a local in Waukesha County, a fire department there has established 3 different ways, their Explorer program, an internship, and a training program. And they are going into the high school by sophomore year, and they're getting these kids involved and excited about firefighting as a career, and in the meantime, they're building their brand and loyalty with these students. That's a great starting point.
So you forget college recruiting. You need to get back to high school.
Well, I say break into the party of college recruiting.
Okay.
Go to the job fairs at the high schools, and go to the job fairs at WCTC or any of the colleges. Honestly, they will probably invite you in. Okay. Short term, though, there's a couple of things. For a long time, I was very resistant to using LinkedIn. It just irritated me to spend the money. But finally, I broke down with our assessor recruitment. I figured I had nothing to lose and I had no candidates. Well, lo and behold, and the thing, what I like about LinkedIn is you can act as a recruiter. I mean, you can surf and do recruiting and reach out, and I did. And the person who's our assessor in Pewaukee today, I found through LinkedIn. So it cost me $450, which is a lot of money, but so was looking, and so was going through the agony of not having a qualified assessor.
Yeah, having that position open for a
Yeah,
while
yeah,
can quickly cost you.
yeah.
Lisa, we're going to run out of time here, and I just have this sort of nagging, old-fashioned, if you will, thought in the back of my mind. Is it good enough for me to observe the golden rule? In other words, if I really approach how I treat employees or how I recruit employees as a nice guy. You know, I'm a nice guy. Truthfully, I don't want to offend anybody. Isn't that enough? Won't that protect me?
No. No. And it's one of the things that I talk about in the program. In fact, I think we're going to be talking about that in the December magazine, that the laws that apply don't care if you think you're a nice guy. There's certain things that you can't say. There's certain things you cannot do. And you have to know what those are, especially if you're involved in hiring and recruiting. Take your fire commissions, take your library boards. If they're doing the hiring and the interviewing, they should be trained in those do's and don'ts, and we're going to be covering those in an upcoming issue.
Okay, great. Well, and we will certainly be working with Lisa a lot in the weeks and months that go forward. Whose job is HR? Does that fall to one person at City Hall? Let's assume you don't have a human resources department.
Yes, someone has to own it, and it has to be the person who's going to take the time to get the education and the training that they absolutely have to do it right. Often it's going to be the administrator. It may be the clerk if there's no administrator. It may be the finance person. We've seen that in a couple of communities. Whoever can do what's required to be good at it is the person who should do it.
Okay, great. Talking with Lisa Bergerson, attorney at law and Wisconsin's expert in municipal human resources issues. Lisa, I want to kind of wrap up around the question of local perspective. I ask all of my guests, what's your local perspective? And for you, I think what I want to know is, what's your vision? You just started this new boutique company to focus on this problem. What's your vision for how municipal HR practices look in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years?
Well, I would say my local perspective first and foremost is that my message is, please understand how important HR is and how it truly does matter. And getting that message out, because what I heard a lot after the webinar, what I heard a lot after the conference seminar is that, well, my local officials don't think it's all that important. So somehow getting that message out, whatever it's going to take, I will be putting resources together for people to share with their local officials, because I think that's where it needs to start in order for the staff to be able to treat it as important as it deserves.
Have you had an opportunity to try to do that yet? Have you seen, is there receptivity on the part of elected officials, or do we have a long way to go?
Well, I can only start with my time at Pewaukee. Our mayor, when I was hired, who's now our administrator, was really behind the HR effort. But some of our appointed officials, not so much. So for our fire commission, for example, after some time, they agreed to let us do the training for them to get them ready for some upcoming. And then afterwards, they're like, oh, thank you for doing that. I have never heard that. And the same with we have a joint library board with the village of Pewaukee, and we did training for them this past winter as they were getting ready to hire a director, and they said the same thing. Oh, if I had only known how important this stuff really is, I really appreciate it. So getting out that word to the local officials, elected, appointed, is going to be part of what I'd like to be doing.
Thank you. Lisa Bergerson, this has been The Local Perspective. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.